Hello students, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Now the question is, a ray of light passes through a triangular prism. Show graphically how the angle of deviation varies with the angle of incidence. Hence define the angle of minimum deviation. So the problem is based on the topic prism, the triangular prism. So in the first part of the problem, we have to show with the help of the graph that how the angle of deviation varies with the angle of incidence. So the first part is based on the graph. So the graph between the angle of deviation, angle of deviation and angle of incidence, angle of incidence looks like this. This is the graph between the angle of deviation. Angle of deviation is given by delta. Angle of incidence is given by I. So this is the graph corresponding to angle of deviation and angle of incidence. So this is the answer of the first part of the problem. But we have to write down the statement also because define we have to define the uh, angle of minimum deviation. Angle of minimum deviation. This is the second part of angle of minimum deviation. So the angle of minimum deviation occurs when this angle of incidence at this particular point, the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of emergence. So when the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of emergence, at that particular case, the deviation angle is called the minimum deviation angle. So the minimum deviation angle corresponds to the situation when I equals to E. This you can show with the help of the diagram of a prism like this. This is a triangular prism, a ray incident on it. This is the normal. The ray goes parallel to the base for the angle of minimum deviation. This is the condition that the refracted ray inside the glass prism should be parallel to the base. So after passing like this inside the prism, it encounters another interface, this particular interface, then it again bends like this. So we can say that the angle between the emergent ray, this is the emergent ray, and this is the emergent ray, and this is the incident ray, incident ray. This is the angle of incidence, and this is the final angle of emergence. So when angle of incidence and angle of emergence are equal, then we get the angle of minimum deviation. This is the angle of minimum deviation. So you have to write down the statement that angle of minimum deviation corresponds corresponds to the situation when angle of incidence is equal to angle of emergence. So you have to write down this particular statement. Alternatively, you can also show that also state that the angle of minimum deviation corresponds to the situation in which the ray inside the prism is parallel to the base. This is the alternative statement that you can also write, that the angle of minimum deviation corresponds to the situation when the ray inside the prism is parallel to the base. This is the alternative statement that you can write, but this is the complete solution of this particular problem. So hope you understand the solution. Thank you.